Okay, welcome to the video game design tutorials. Now I'm not quite sure how many videos these tutorials are going to be, but I'm just going to keep releasing them until I feel we're at a point where we can develop games, and then we'll move from there. After every 2 videos, there will be a little activity at the end where I'll ask you to change the program or modify it in some way, and you have to do that, show it to me before moving on. And that way I know that you're understanding what's going on before moving on to more complex game design aspects. Now with game design, there's going to be a lot of things you haven't seen before. We need to create graphical interfaces. We need to program events to happen. We need triggers. We need a lot of other things. And we're going to make all that, and a lot of it's going to utilize while loops, if statements, and things we are familiar with. So just be prepared and keep track of everything and explore. Don't just say, okay, I think I get that, I'm just going to move on. Don't rush yourself through this process. And if you ever feel that I'm rushing you through this process, let me know, and we will stop that from happening. Yes, unless you're going like super extremely turtle slow, and then that's a different case. Now, I've looked through most of the videos on YouTube with pertaining to designing games with Visual Basic, and the one where I'm getting most of my resources from is this person over here, his channel. He has probably the most in-depth game design tutorial I've seen. So most of what I do is going to come from his channel, meaning he is the person who has taught me, and now I'm going to be using his code to show you how to develop games. And hopefully by the end of this, I'll be able to take his work and make my own original game. But to start, I will be using his code as a base. Okay. So I think I've talked enough about the introduction. Let's go ahead and start. I'm going to go File, New Project, create a new Windows form application. Let's go ahead and call this Practice Game because it's our first attempt to create a game. Let's hit OK. And now we have a form. Right away, let's just go ahead and save this, because what's happened to me a few times is it's crashed and I've lost all my work. So I'm going to do it again. That's fine. Not a big deal. It happens. But I don't want it to crash while I'm explaining stuff. Okay. And we got a small screen here, but let's make it a little bit bigger because we want to have a whole interface to like look at or to have characters move on. And a screen this small, for a Game Boy screen, it's fine, but it's a little too small. And we can just like grab a side of it and stretch it out. But let's get a little bit more precise. We're going to adjust the pixels of this screen to 750 width and 600, or let's do 550 height. And the reason why we do that is because we want to stick with a 640 by 480 resolution. And that's the same resolution that are used for like 480p YouTube videos. And then we'll have a little bit extra between 640 and 750 that we can have like interface objects over here. So that's why we're going beyond 640 by 480, just by a little bit, so that we can have a little bit extra for an interface. Okay, now let's go ahead and go into the code. I was thinking I should rename the form, but I'll do that in a bit. And we need to add a library to our code. Now, libraries are big in Java. We use them quite a bit. In fact, I don't think you can get much to run in the Java program without a library doing something. And we need to add a library to this that allows us to create graphics on our screen. Without a library, you cannot have graphics. And in this case, the code to get graphics is imports space system dot drawing. And let me increase the resolution of this. Imports space system dot drawing. And with this line, we'll be able to have graphics on our screen. Of course, we need to program everything, but at least that will allow us to get graphics. Now we need to create some global variables to use for the graphics. So these are going to be our graphics variables. I'm just going to comment this, graphics variables. And we're going to have a few of them. The first one is going to be G as graphics. So we're initializing the letter G to be our graphics. Let's initialize BBG as graphics as well. And this is going to be our back buffer graphics. So I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. We also need a bitmap. So as a bitmap. And also as a rectangle. Okay, so G is our graphics. There are like main graphics that we're going to use. And we need to initialize them and we need to have them in a letter or in a word of some sort. BBG is known as our back buffer graphics, meaning it's the next image that's going to come in place. So whenever we have things happening on the screen really quickly, sometimes we can't have one image appear and then the next one appear right after. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay. And if there's a little bit of a delay, your graphics are going to be like flickery or choppy because it's going to load up your graphics, but before it could load up the next G value, it's going to take like a small fraction of a second before it can update it again, and it's going to look choppy. But by creating two variables, one is the primary graphics and one is the back buffer graphics, we can create a smooth frame rate. So it doesn't look like there's any choppiness in between them. The bitmap. This is what is like where we're allowed to like draw stuff. It's a bitmap. So if I want to paint graphics all over this screen, I'm going to eventually set my bitmap to 750 by 550. And that's going to mean I can draw graphics anywhere on this screen. If you don't have a bitmap though, you cannot put graphics in your game, and your game's going to be kind of lame. So this is needed to draw the graphics. These are the graphics themselves. And this R for rectangle is just saying that I'm going to draw rectangles. So I want to initialize R to be my rectangle. You have a lot of basic shapes in here, I believe. So we could do C as, or I guess we don't have circles. And never mind this. Apparently all we have are rectangles. So if we want to draw a circle, we actually have to draw it in pixel by pixel, which might take time. But like I said, I'm not an expert at this. I'm learning it as you are learning in a sense. I've spent a few weekends on this stuff, but I'm still new to it. Okay, so these are going to be our graphics variables. Now let's also set up some frames per second variables. And let's create one that's going to look at our screen. And I know you can't see it, but usually there's a clock down here and the date on your computers. We're going to have a variable that changes in terms of what time it is, meaning the time in terms of seconds, to tell us what our frame rate is for this game. So let's initialize this to be, what's a good name for that? Let's do int seconds. Yeah, int seconds will be good. As an integer, and this is going to be equal to the function time of days dot second. And there's no S here, I believe. Okay, so what this is doing is when you run this program, it's going to initialize and it's going to look at the clock on your computer and it's going to say what second is it. And if it's like the 40th second, this is going to be equal to 40, and then it's going to store it inside of in seconds. And I believe you can do the same thing with minutes, but we'll find out right now. Yes, you can do the same thing with minutes. So if you wanted it to take the current minute it was and store it inside of this, you could. But since we want to know the frames per second, then we're going to keep this at seconds. And we're going to need a few other things. Dim, int, let's call this frame rate or clock speed. Let's call this dim int frame rate as an integer. And this is going to be equal to 0. And then let's create int max frame rate as an integer. And this is also going to be equal to 0. So we're going to eventually set this up in a loop, and it's going to have this frame rate climb up, like it's going to go through the loop many, many times over the course of 1 second. And when it reaches that 1 second, it's going to stop. It's going to store that value into int max frame rate, and then we're going to have it printed out on the screen. So the screen's going to tell us every second what is the frame rate of that second. And it's going to change every second because every second, this is the while loop's going to start again. And it's just going to go up as many times as it can happen in 1 second, and then store it in here, the max frame rate, and print it out on the screen. Okay. And we also need a global variable to tell us, is our game running? Is our game running? So the videos I've seen online suggest that we use a Boolean. And I know I think we briefly talked about Booleans, but they're pretty much true or false. I guess this isn't int, this is bool. Bool is running. They are pretty much variables that can hold either true or false. So we want to know if our game's running, and if that's true, our game's going to continue to run. But if something happens or if our game glitches out and breaks, then we want it to give us the value of false so it doesn't like crash our computer. So this is a Boolean holding currently the value of true. Okay. So to start, since this is our primary form, meaning we might have more forms later on, we want to have the program focus on this. So I'm going to comment something. This allows us to immediately control this form. Okay, and you're familiar with this one, not me.show, which means it's going to reveal this form, which is form 1 right now. And then we need it to focus on it, so me.focus. So it's going to allow us to control this form right when the program starts. So we're not going to have to like click on the form to activate it. It will automatically focus in on it and let us control that form. So we can automatically start moving our character or something. So that's going to let us control the form. And then let's go ahead and create some graphics objects. So this is going to initialize graphics objects. And when I say initialize graphics objects, we already declared them up here, but we didn't store any values in them. We didn't write equals to and then type in all that. We usually want to do that in the form. So G is going to be equal to me dot create graphics. Let's just, whoops. It's going to allow us to create graphics for G. And BB, that's our bitmap, is equal to a new bitmap. ME width, comma, ME dot height. And I'm forgetting this. Okay. So now we've given G the ability to create graphics on this form. That's what the ME is for, to create graphics on this form. And we've told the program that the graphics can be created anywhere on this form because we said the form's width and the form's height. And at the start of this program, we specified that as 750 by 550 pixels. So this form can be 750 by 550. And that's all our drawing screen. We can draw anywhere on this form. Okay. So let's create a procedure now. We're going to call this start game loop. And what this procedure is going to focus on is it's going to allow our game to run as long as we want it to run. So if we had linear code, eventually our game would end, and it would probably end very quickly. So we need to put it inside of a loop. Now the only problem with putting it inside of a loop, and actually let me go ahead and create the procedure down here. So, so be sure you're after the end sub, private sub, and start game loop. The only problem we have with loops right now is usually if we had like a do while loop, like let's say a do while 1 is equal to 1, this loop runs forever, and it creates it's an infinite loop. And a lot of you have created infinite loops. It doesn't have to look exactly like this one, but while an infinite loop is running, you cannot input any commands. The only thing you can do is crash the program by like clicking on the screen a lot or doing something. So if I ran this program right now, like I can't even move it because it's crashed the program. It's actually on my other screen. So I have to stop. It created an infinite loop. If you do this right now, just put in this line of code, run your program, and you will see that it creates an infinite loop where you cannot do anything. You cannot even move the form to the next screen. And we want the loop to be running, but while the loop is running, we want to be able to put in commands so that our characters can move left, right, up, down, or grab stuff. So we need this loop to allow us to move while it's happening. So we need to make sure this program is working and allows us to input commands. So this is where that Boolean comes in. The bool is running. So we're going to do while, and let's just use a do while since I already wrote it there. Bool is running is equal to true. So let's do this while this is true. And now we're going to put in the following line. Application dot do events. What this line allows you to do is it allows your program to accept inputs while the code or while the loop is running. So if you run your code now, you'll notice that you can actually move the form or you can click in the screen and it's not crashing your program. Because even though it's in a loop, it's waiting for you to type in something or like give it a command like an arrow key or something or click on a mouse point somewhere. So it's waiting for commands even though the loop is running. So it doesn't crash your program. So this allows you to input commands even though there is a loop running. Okay.